Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here, not in New York. Great topic for you today. Let's do it. What's the most disturbing thing you've ever seen while in a hospital? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. 8 years old. I was in a car wreck involving more than 25 cars and many ambulances. For some reason, my mom and brother were put into one ambulance, and I was put into a different one. I just did what the adults in charge told me to do. We ended up at a different hospital. I could walk, so they put me on a bench to wait and forgot about me. While waiting, they wheeled in a gurney, and a bunch of people were yelling orders. Suddenly everyone left in a different direction. I was alone on a bench in a hallway with a gurney. Blood started leaking to the floor. Then someone ran back to get the gurney, and the patient had died by then. They pulled the sheet over the face and left it there, with 8-year-old me sitting there, wondering what I should do. I finally needed to pee, so I went looking for a bathroom. I asked a nurse for a bathroom, and she yelled, "How did you get in here?" I told her the ambulance guy told me to wait on the bench. She took me to a bathroom and got me some food. I had some cuts, but nothing bad. She had me go wait in a regular waiting room, and after an hour, I heard someone at the counter saying my parents' names. The woman at the desk said, "Not at this hospital. Other patients went to blank hospital." So I found my grandmother, and she drove me to the other hospital, and I was reunited with my family again. It had been about 10 hours. A man who was trying to recover from open heart surgery developed an infection, and they had to leave the sternum open to allow for healing. If you looked in it, you could see the heart beating. Didn't help that it was Thanksgiving, and my family was present to cheer him up and be there for support. He coughed, high thoracic pressure, and tore a 4-centimeter hole in the right ventricle of his heart, which caused blood to spurt on the ceiling and walls in front of his family. I responded to his code, and he was still alive when we got him to the OR, but he didn't make it. Can't imagine what the family went through to witness that. I'm a paramedic, so not much phases me after 40 years in New York City. One night, getting our bus back in order after a job, a van pulled up in front of the ambulance bays and pushed a body out. We went over, started working the guy. He was beaten and hit by a car at some point. I turned my head to grab the paddles from the life pack defibrillator when we lost the pulse, and a young man walked up and shot between my head and my partner's, rendering me deaf in my right ear. Dumped 9 bullets into the guy. I was basically wearing his brains at this point and fell backward on my knees. Bronx, Lebanon Hospital, 1980s. I got a nifting hearing aid though. Was in the ER for a broken ankle years ago. Suddenly got parked in a corner. Staff told me a bunch of patients from a mass casualty event were coming in. Serious multiple vehicle accident. In true Canadian fashion, they asked me if I was fine to wait. I said, yeah, I'm good. I got an ice pack and a high pain tolerance. Second question, are you squeamish? Me, not usually. Staff, cool, because shit's about to get really messy. Enjoy the live entertainment. Saw a bunch of really messed up looking folks wheeled in on gurneys. One guy was screaming bloody murder. And fair enough, one arm was damn near tore right off his body. Dude was absolutely pouring blood, while 2 paramedics tried to hold it in place, and boy, did he get popular fast. I couldn't really see what was going on, but they had him calm down pretty fast with something, and quickly stabilized him. ER crews are a special kind of crazy, and I admire the fuck out of them. I used to work part-time in the operating room of a level 1 trauma center as essentially a gopher for whatever the doctors and nurses might need during a surgery, sponges, sutures, etc. They request something, and I get it into the room as quickly as possible. One Saturday morning, normally weekends are quiet since they don't schedule surgeries, the OR is buzzing with activity. I'm asked to bring a couple items into the room, and when I open the door, I see a hand sitting on a tray covered in povidone iodine curling up. The patient was having his wrist worked on before they attempted to reattach their hand. You could see blood pumping out in sync with his heartbeat. Apparently what had happened was said patient was having relations with a married woman in a car. The married woman's husband found out, yelled at him to get out of the car, and when he was in the process of stepping out, had his hand chopped off just above the wrist with a machete. Crazy morning for sure. A patient playing with his own intestines, probably. On an emotional, ethical level, patient with a traumatic brain injury that severely impaired her short-term memory, who kept asking about her son. Her son had died in the accident that left her with a TBI. Your options were to lie to her, or to traumatize her over and over with the truth. Runners-up include many maggot-related cases, medical leech that escaped from the room and left a trail of blood on the floor, coding, dying kids, dismembered legs being handed off to sterile field after amputation. I could go on. I've worked in hospitals for a long time. I'm an electrician by trade, and for a time I worked at a very large, very prestigious learning hospital operated by an also very prestigious school with an enormous endowment. I had been working in their morgue on and off for months, sometimes at night directly over cadavers and cardboard boxes, sometimes surrounded by translucent plastic bins filled with preserved body parts. It was also not uncommon to have to stop working for a minute so they could get past, with a fresh corpse. Point is, I got desensitized to dead bodies really quickly, but regardless, this one has stuck with me. On a random day, my partner and I were doing some work passing conduits through the morgue well. As such, we were both consistently in and out of the morgue through its single door. In the hall next to the door, someone had left a gurney with a bundle of dirty sheets at the foot. It was there for hours. We moved it. Hospital staff moved it. People set things down on this gurney. It was active. People were involved with it. Toward the end of the day, my partner and I are both on the morgue side of the door when a man suddenly exclaims loudly and incredulously, "Who the left a dead baby in the hall?" Yep, that bundle of dirty sheets, dead newborn, sitting on a hospital gurney for hours. When I said it stuck with me, it wasn't the death that left its mark. By now the dead were like your coworkers. You were surrounded by them and their production was shit. But the haphazardness of it all, the idea that this tiny corpse, the embodiment of every loving parent's greatest fear, was just wrapped in some rags and left there like tomorrow's laundry. And all of us had unwittingly interacted with it just like that, completely oblivious to what was really inside. Work in a hospital. Have a repeat PT frequent flyer who had chewed every one of her fingers off down to the knuckles. Her past history indicates that there was a time of no mental illness and a well-balanced life, but she lost it after her son OD'd. As a former hospital employee, I can tell you the most unsettling fact. In most hospitals, the cafeteria and morgue are in close proximity because they share refrigeration lines. When I was a kid, my mom used to take me to her job as an ER nurse because she had to, and I would sleep in the break room for nurses. And one day, and on our way home, she gently picked me up as we were walking down the hallway, and I looked at the floor and go, "What's that?" And she calmly goes, "Brains." Apparently there was a guy who shot his brains out that was rushed into the ER on our way out, and they were still spilling out on his way in. A K-hole. Really though. I was given ketamine for a snapped and dislocated leg, and within moments, it felt like I was yanked out of my body by a string attached to my head, then flying through space and time while still being tethered to my body, in the sense that I could hear my moans and yells as the ER staff reset my bones. No pain after that though, just a wild ride. Heard, not seen, but when I was 16, I spent over a week in the hospital recovering from relatively minor surgery. Somewhere down the hall was a young girl, guessing about my age, who at night would scream and cry in pain for her, I believe, cancer treatments. She would also sob that she wanted to go home. My heart broke for her, and looking back I kind of wish I had ventured down the hall to maybe try and console or at least distract her. I still think about those screams and sobs sometimes. Makes me feel grateful for my own health, but mainly I feel sorry for those, especially the young ones, who have to go through such trauma. RN here. Very early in my career, I worked 2 full-time jobs, briefly. One in labor and delivery in a hospital, the other in a nursing home. I was the assigned wound care nurse on my 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift in the nursing home. Some patients had wounds so painful and deep and so big it seemed cruel to continue their treatments. What made me end my second job, though, in the nursing home, was not the decubitus ulcers. It was a stroke patient who was in a vegetative state for several years and on a ventilator. She needed her trach suctioned out multiple times on each shift. You could hear her from the opposite end of the hall, gagging and needing to be suctioned. I would hear her and run to her room and suction out trach. Oftentimes, I would ask another staff member to assist me, as the tracheostomy needed to be removed and cleaned. As I was removing her tracheostomy tube, as the aide was suctioning her, we noticed white wriggling worms and not much mucus. She didn't know what they were. I did. I grew up on a farm. This woman had maggots all in her trachea, and I'm assuming into her lungs. I suctioned for what seemed like hours before reinserting her trach. I immediately called the MD on call and informed him, and was told he would check her out later that morning on his rounds. As soon as my shift was over, I handed in my resignation. No way should any person on a ventilator ever have this happen. The care, or lack thereof, for these residents was heartbreaking. Tragedies and accidents happen, and all of them are heartbreaking. What really frustrates me is when you hear stories of abuse and lack of care when you could and should be cared for. Anyway, I'm in Cancun for a friend's wedding. That's why I'm here. Not to change a dark subject, but hope you guys are doing well, and see you soon. Enjoy. I was in the ER waiting room. My brother was being treated for a head wound. Several women, maybe a man, a young man, all of Middle Eastern descent, so hard to understand. I really don't remember who came in, absolutely hysterical and beside themselves. At best, as I could determine, they were the parents of 2 boys, brothers 16 and 12, who were in a bad car accident. Both died in the ER. It was one of the worst experiences I've ever witnessed. There was a couple who were fighting in the room right next to me. The guy was wearing a white shirt, but it got stained dark red, and there were holes in it. His girlfriend and/or wife was there, and she was a complete mess. She repeatedly kept saying, "I'm sorry and I love you." They surprisingly were not there for long, but after they left, I asked my mom what happened, because she worked there, so she knew. She shot him 4 times in the chest and twice in the back. This isn't unsettling because it's creepy or anything, but because it's extremely sad, so trigger warning, I guess. Years ago I had heart surgery, so afterwards I was in the thoracic ward for recovery. Part of that recovery was getting up and walking every so often, and I wasn't being nosy, but you could see in the other rooms as you went by, unless they had the curtains all the way closed. During the day, most of the rooms would have a light on, maybe a TV also, visitors talking to the patient, etc. But one room, where the patient looked to be a younger woman on a ventilator, never had a light on. And her visitor, who I think was her mother, never appeared to leave the chair she was in her daughter's bedside. She just held her hand the whole time, with her head down. I was there for 8 days, and it was about 6 days of the same. Wasn't really up and walking the first couple of days. I don't know what happened to that young lady, but it felt very ominous and heartbreaking. I genuinely hope that she made it, and that her mother didn't have to watch her daughter slowly pass. Last time I was at the hospital, I was visiting my grandma, who was sharing a room with another elderly patient. My grandma was eating an egg salad sandwich, and suddenly started vomiting it up everywhere. While I was trying to help her, The lady next to us began violently shitting her pants and yelling, "I'm shitting my pants." Earlier that day, I had heard her say she hadn't pooped in 5 days. The smell in there was absolutely vile. I was also about 20 weeks pregnant and also started to throw up. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I had a man with an axe in his skull sit beside me in the chairs in the waiting room for over 5 hours. The nurses were good though. They couldn't get him a bed, but they brought him bags of blood that they asked me, a complete stranger, to watch out for. She says sarcastically as possible, I was there with my 7-year-old son that was completely traumatized by it. When I was in post-surgical bed, the guy next to me was delirious, and to nurse me, he had an amputation of his leg scheduled. Apparently, he was an uncontrolled diabetic, and the leg had lost sensation and blood flow, and was deteriorating rapidly. I drifted off to sleep for like 20 minutes, and when I woke up he was gone. He'd checked himself out against the doc's recommendation. What blew me away was the mess in the bed where his leg had been. The colors were so unreal. I am very careful about staying on top of cuts and scrapes since then. No infection for me, thanks. Trying to make a longer story short, I was sent to the local crappy hospital from a military clinic due to a shitty draw. I was fine. There was the main waiting room, and the behind the door waiting area where you waited after having whatever preliminary stuff you required. During my time in the main waiting room, a crackhead used the payphone to loudly talk about how her older kid was taken by CPS earlier that day, and her baby, 6 months, had a strange bruise, and she was likely losing him that day. Then in the back waiting room, asking someone to borrow their phone to call their male partner or dealer to make plans once she lost custody. The back waiting area was basically folding chairs in a tiny alcove. An older male physician called a woman's name who didn't speak English and he didn't speak Spanish, and proceeded with zero privacy to try to loudly, not professional, but he wasn't trying to be an ass if that makes sense, get her to understand there was no heartbeat on her scan and her baby was dead and she needed to return for a D&C. Next time that military med tech did a bad blood draw, I was like, "F off. I'm not going through that again. I'll either have a heart attack tonight or you can redraw tomorrow." I was taken to the ER because I passed out from the stress of my daughter being hospitalized. I collapsed in the hallway. I was lucky that I was immediately taken to an exam room to wait for a doctor. I was not so lucky that I was not alone in there. They had not gotten around to moving the recipient of a fatal gunshot wound before giving me the room. It did, however, help me put my situation into perspective. I would say the most unsettling thing was that every hospital I worked for in my entire career was run by amoral sociopaths who would gladly let dozens of patients die to save a few bucks on staffing, equipment, and training. Medical professionals in general want to help people, and most are trying their best. The soulless empty suits in the executive suites want to extract as much money from you as possible before disposing of you, either as a discharge, a transfer, or a corpse. Got taken to A&E after a wind shear threw me off my motorbike. I was stuck in one of those neck brace boxes for hours while waiting for a full-body x-ray, so could only stare at the ceiling. The whole time some sweet old lady is chatting with me from what I assume was the cubicle opposite me, and eventually she asks her attending if she can come over to me. Guy says yeah, so I hear her shuffle on over and eventually make it to my limited sight range. A good chunk of her head was caved in, and it took all that I had left in the tank to not freak out while strapped to a gurney, and she was just chatting away as if nothing was wrong. Not really unsettling, but the backstory was effed. I was in school to be a paramedic, and as a requirement, you have to do a bunch of hospital rotations. Basically, you get to do skills and assessments in a controlled environment before you get out into the more dynamic setting, the field. Anyways, I'm pulling up to this county hospital, and there are cop cars everywhere. As I walk in, I see a huge black guy being told to get off the bed with a shitload of cops with him. Not your average cops. I'm talking refrigerator-sized dudes, high in tights, gang unit, SWAT patches, etc. Full-on door kickers and skull crusher type dudes escorting this guy in cuffs out. Long story, trying to make it short, this guy is R-ing this teenage girl. He was a babysitter or family friend, standard story. Well-performing student, outgoing social, and everything goes downhill. Withdrawn, isolating, grade slipping. Girl finally admits she's being R'd. So he's indicted or something, but not arrested. Family even moves away to a different school to help her start again. During this time, she meets a guy online who she friends and starts improving. Said new friend says, "Hey, we should meet up." She does, and it turns out to be her artist. He R's and murders her and dumps her body. Girl goes missing, family notices, calls 911, cops ask anyone want to harm her. Rapist is suspect number 1, and they find him and arrest him. During this, he fakes a seizure. Cops do their due diligence and take him to the ER. Now, once a cop takes a patient to the ER, 9 times out of 10, they don't want to sit all night with the guy in the ER. They want to hand him off to security and go back to policing. And that's what happened. Only the artist effing overpowered the guard, took his gun, and ran out of the ER. Anyways, they caught him, ended up tasing him, and because they didn't want him to die in jail for some stupid reason, brought him back to the ER for him to be formally cleared and then off to jail. Last I read, he was given life or the death penalty for capital murder. Well, in a memory care place, not a hospital, but it was having to watch my father with dementia, a bladder infection, sepsis, and pneumonia, actively dying for 2.5 days in palliative care, after having to make the choice to stop all of the treatment. No food, no water, just drugs to prevent suffering. They would turn him every couple of hours, check to see if his diaper needed changing, and him moaning when they moved him. He would sometimes lift his arms up like he was typing in midair. The doctors and nurses there reassured me that this was normal and happened a lot, and that he wasn't suffering. It was harrowing, and I'm still trying to deal with it. I did find a YouTube channel by a hospice nurse, and her videos about what dying people look like helped me a lot. All 3 of patients I once shared a room with. The very elderly man across from me had dementia and couldn't care for himself. He was so skinny he escaped his bed by squeezing through the guardrails on the side of the bed. He pulled out his IV and was getting into his suit when the nurse came in. She asked him where he was going. He said he had a doctor's appointment. The moaning of the guy next to me woke me up one night. I look over, and he's sitting on the side of his bed, peeing into a urinal. He's wearing medical mesh underwear. His penis is red and scaly. His urine is coming out in small trickles, and he's moaning in pain with each squirt. The other patient, a big bear of a man, picture Grisly Adams with white hair. He slipped and fell on ice. Clots from the injury on his knee traveled to his lungs, giving him pulmonary embolisms. It must have been a huge saddle clot, because he deteriorated quickly. By the time I was released, he went from relatively normal to being on a ventilator. I was on a ward and overheard during the morning rounds that another patient was at risk of sepsis. The ward was very short-staffed, and I noticed that patient start to shake later in the day, a sign of high fever infection. My patient alarm produced no results, so I hopped out of bed and ran to the nurse's desk. Sure enough, serious infection. They hooked her up to some paracetamol and antibiotics, but despite her condition being really serious, not enough staff to watch her. A few hours later, she rang her bell, then started shouting that she needed a sick bowl. I jumped across the room with one, too late because she started vomiting huge amounts of blood. Ran out again, this time shouting for help myself. It was a burst esophageal varices. The patient gasped out to me that she needed me to call her partner and get him to come in. I've had that feeling that this is it myself shortly before I needed resuscitating, so I had to call a strange man and tell him his wife was in critical condition. The staff then got quite cross with me for being in the general area. She survived until the next day, at which point I was discharged. I really hope she's okay. Her medical condition wasn't super extraordinarily disturbing. I've vomited pints of blood. It was frightening, but not unprecedentedly awful per se. It was just the fact that someone could be so ill and in so much danger, and it came down to another patient running around fetching nurses at crisis points, even when they're aware of the risk. I was in the emergency room late at night for something not exactly super pressing, but also dangerous enough that they kept me overnight in a room and stuff. Anyways, when I first got there, they had some sort of call come in over a speaker sounding thingy, and a ton of nurses and doctors looking people rushed past my doorway toward the trauma bay. I live in a small town and know the hospital pretty well. We have 2 trauma rooms at our ER right by the entrance where the ambulances drop off. So, I see them all rush past, and I hear someone come in screaming bloody murder, yelling over and over, "I don't want to die! Please don't let me die!" For a couple of minutes, it seemed like. It might have been less time, but it felt like forever. I was just kind of shocked. Eventually, he got quieter and quieter, until eventually nothing. A few minutes later, a stretcher rolled by with a body bag on it. From what I heard, it was a bad car accident, and it sounded like a man around my age, like late 20s, early 30s-ish. I was just so taken back by that and didn't really ask for anything the remainder of that night. Anytime the nurses asked me anything, I just answer as quickly and short as possible, because I just felt so not sick because I wasn't that guy. This one's personal, but seeing my father having a psychotic episode was hard. He has Parkinson's and is usually well medicated. He needed a hip replacement, and the surgery staff didn't have any experience with Parkinson's patients. His Parkinson's medication was stopped just prior to surgery. I completely understand why, and the entire unmedicated symptoms of Parkinson's came crashing down on him. He was hallucinating, paranoid, and experiencing extreme levels of anxiety. Hearing my father ask me if the spiders on the wall were real broke my heart. He needed to be moved away from the nurses' station because for him, their voices were distorting into demonic threats. My mother and I were able to maintain a presence in his room during the entire time he was there. We were the only concepts that were able to ground him. It was so hard seeing my dad like that. The next time he was in hospital, he was under the care of Parkinson's nurses, and they, without fear of contradiction, are angels. They managed his medication and experienced so skillfully that it made me understand why people choose that career. I worked as a tech in a scanning unit for a year in an industry at uni. I was not trained to read the scans, but I had been next to enough consultants walking through scans of cancer patients to know what a tumor roughly looked like. One guy, mid to late 60s, came out of the scanner and grabbed my hand, saying, "Am I going to be alright, son?" I knew he was riddled with metastases, but just had to say, "I don't know, I'm just a technician. You'll have to wait for the consultant." Years later, my sister had a psychotic break. I had to drive for an hour to pick her up and take her to A&E. She ended up in a mental hospital, checked herself out, and later killed herself. But that's not the disturbing part at this point. Whilst we were in the emergency area, 2 young women, girls really, came in completely off their faces, one of them bleeding profusely from her head, with an older man, 30s, talking very loudly and controlling them completely. The nurse behind the desk told me they were prostitutes, and he was their pimp. They were there often, in trouble, and they had called the police already. The older man then left and never reappeared. I hope they get away one day, but I fear not.